Hey friends, how are you today? It's Jenna from Musings from the Middle School, and I am here with my third installment of Dear White Teacher. This is likely the last, I think, in my head when I decided I was going to do this. I had 3 videos in mind. I had broken it up into 3 different parts. So for the time being, this is, I think the last one that I'm going to be doing, at least for a little while. The last video made you guys angry, made a lot of people very angry, which I knew was going to happen. Anytime we talk about white privilege, it definitely, causes a lot of emotion. There's always a lot of reactive conversation that happens afterwards. People do not like that term. It makes them so incredibly uncomfortable. And I understand, if you watched my first video, you know that it made me really uncomfortable too. I was deeply offended by the term. But the more I learned about it, and the more I talked to people, and the more I read, and the more I explored, and the more I put, being an anti-racist into practice, the more I came to understand the idea and become comfortable with it. So, again, if white privilege makes you angry, it makes you feel defensive, it makes you feel ashamed, that's okay. That's where most of us start. It makes a lot of us feel that way in the beginning. But I encourage you, one of the things that I think I learned from the teacher that I was talking about in the first video in doing this work is that anytime I was confronted with a really strong emotion, usually that emotion is anger, but if you unpack that more, you see that it's not so much anger, it's fear, it's shame, it's embarrassment, but it sort of feels like anger is a strong, gripping kind of feeling. But what I learned is that anytime I am faced with that feeling of, ooh, I'm going to react to this. I don't like this. I'm not cool with this. I'm uncomfortable with this. Stay with it. Explore it more. Don't just react and then sort of shut it down. Sit with it. Because if something is, sparking a strong reaction from you, there's a reason for it. And you want to uncover it. You want to unpack it. And as you do that, you learn and you grow. And that, I think, that's the most important part in this work, I think, for white people who are trying to be allies, who are working to be anti-racist. We have to really be okay with sitting in our uncomfortable feelings and unpacking them and growing from them, because that is really the only way. We have not experienced racism ourselves, and so we don't have that firsthand experience that guides us to doing this work. We have to learn. We have to be educating. We have to be listening. And that's how we grow into being, an active anti-racist individual. So, like I said, I did know that last video was going to make people angry. I got some really rough messages. I understand that people get upset. But at the same time, I just encourage you to sit with it and keep growing. One thing I'm going to just say too is that you absolutely do not have to send me any resources that advocate against the idea of white privilege being real, that talk about racism not being real. I mean, I don't need to see those videos. I've seen them. I know the arguments that get made all the time about why white privilege isn't real and why white privilege is dangerous to believe in and why racism isn't real. I know what those people are saying. Like I said, I've been doing this work for over 10 years now. I've read these things. I know the arguments. They're not, you don't need to send them to me because I've seen them before. So I just want to make that clear. You don't have to, you can save your writing for, it's just, you don't need to spend your time doing that. I understand those arguments. I don't need to see them. So what I wanted to do in this last video is talk to you about what it is you can be doing right now in your job, in your work, in your classroom, to be, moving toward being an anti-racist educator. Things that you can really do that will make a difference. Again, understand that I am not an expert in this. I am definitely not. I am always learning. I am always growing. I am always reading. I am, having different conversations with people. I'm on different committees. Like, this is something that I'm always exploring. So I'm not saying that I am an expert in this. I'm just going to want to give you some suggestions for things that I have seen work, and for, things that research tells us works. And, there are things that you can actually do, because a lot of people are like, great, it's one thing to talk about being an anti-racist, or to post memes or to black out your picture on Facebook, or, it's one thing to do that. It's another thing to then sort of take that into action and, be doing the work that needs to be done to start making a difference. So once you really understand it, that's when you can start to, take action and be confident in your actions, and, start to do the things that we need to do to dismantle the systems. So I have notes here that I'm going to be reading from, and some quotes from some books and articles that I want to share with you to sort of get us talking about this. So if I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing. So the first thing that I think is really important, the first way that you can be an anti-racist educator, is you need to acknowledge racism and the ideology of white supremacy. White supremacy is another very triggering term. I understand that. White privilege is, it's triggering like white privileges. White supremacy makes us immediately think of the Ku Klux Klan or neo-Nazis or burning crosses. But that isn't only what white supremacy is. White supremacy just means that we live in a community, in a society, in a country where having white skin gives you a privilege that is not afforded to people that don't have white skin. So in White Fragility, DiAngelo talks a lot about getting comfortable with the term white supremacy. So if you've never read that book, I cannot recommend that book enough to you. Read it. It's a good place to start. It's tough to sort of, it's a scientific kind of read. So I understand that it's not, it's not the easiest read in the world, but it's so important and you will learn a lot. At least I think so. So yeah, acknowledging racism and the ideology of white supremacy. So, Dr. Kendi, in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, says, the common idea of claiming colorblindness is akin to the notion of being not racist. As with the not racist, the colorblind individual, by ostensibly failing to see race, fails to see racism and falls into racist passivity. I talked about this in my first video. I definitely started out on my journey. My first few years as a teacher, I considered myself colorblind. I considered myself somebody who did not see race, who did not see color. I did not take it into account in any way. I really thought I was colorblind, and I thought that was the way you were supposed to be. And what I learned is that, you need to be able to see race to acknowledge racism. If you don't see race, if you see everybody as being exactly the same, it's really difficult to see racism and understand, where it exists in your classroom, in your school, in your building, in society, and then work to dismantle it. So you need to see race. You don't want to be colorblind. That's not the goal. Color is important. Color is what makes the human race interesting. That color represents something. It brings something to the table. It represents culture and customs and things that we want to understand. It's, it's important to see it. And, you need to see it to understand how racism works. So that's the first thing that I'm going to recommend. You need to acknowledge racism and the ideology of white supremacy. And I know that it makes us uncomfortable, but again, if you feel discomfort, if what I'm saying to you is making you angry, sit with it, unpack it a little bit, read more, learn more, talk to people. There's no harm in listening to other people. I know I just said, don't send me all those, resources of, all the things that you have that refute this idea, Candace Owens videos or whatnot, but I don't mean it because I don't want to hear how other people think. It's just that I already have heard that argument before. So, you know, I know I know how that, you know, train of thought goes. But I encourage you always to listen to people who, if somebody says something to you that sounds new, like something you've never considered, something you've never really thought about before, and if your first instinct is discomfort, sit with that, listen to it some more. Like I said, unpack it, dig deeper, find out what's going on. For your own sanity, really. You know, I find for myself, if I hear something and it causes me to feel a really strong emotion, I'm doing myself no service by just letting it go, because I haven't dealt with it. I haven't handled that emotion. I need to really sort of like dig and understand. So, you know, even if you think you're not doing it for anyone else, like just do it for yourself. If something makes you angry, if something's making you uncomfortable, dig deeper, figure it out, what's going on there. The second thing I think is really important for you to do is you have to engage in vigilant self-awareness. Deanna Simmons wrote an article called How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator. You can find it if you Google it. D-E-N-A is how you spell her first name, Simmons, S-I-M-M-O-N-S. She says in this article, people who are white have more privilege and fewer barriers to resources than Black people and other folks of color. If you don't believe that, go research it. You can find so many examples throughout history. You can find, you can find science, history, and narratives that support that. So Google it. If you don't believe it, go Google it, learn more. If we do not know our power, we can abuse it unintentionally or fail to leverage it toward anti-racism. So you have to be constantly, checking yourself, digging into yourself, finding out where your thoughts are coming from, checking your bias all the time. You have to be incredibly self-aware. As I said to you in the first video, even though I've been doing this for a long time, there are still things that happen, articles that I read, things I see in the news where I feel myself have a reaction. And then I think to myself, oh, well, there's some bias coming out there. So even though I feel like I've been doing this work for a long time, I still uncover biases that I have all the time, because this is a lifetime of learning. This is a life's work, uncovering this kind of stuff. So you want to always be self-aware and always be, checking yourself and thinking about it and examining what it is that you do. And this is really important in the classroom, I think. Examining what your classroom decor, your classroom library, your curriculum, is what you are sharing with kids, is the space that you're creating for them friendly. I've talked so much about books and making sure that your books represent all different voices and cultures and communities, making sure that your books are written by people in those communities, making sure that your stories are not just sharing one story of that group. You don't want the single narrative, that danger of a single story. That's the most incredible TED Talk if you've never seen it before. You don't want books that only showcase one side of that experience. You want all sides to be considered. So you want to always be researching and looking and digging and figuring out and reading and finding stuff that you can share with your kids that lets them know their experience, their life is important enough to be included in the classroom. I just forgot what I was going to say, but so I've shared with you before too, that quote, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, that books should be mirrors and windows. Like kids need to see their life reflected back to them, but they also need to be able to see a window into somebody else's life. And I've had teachers before say to me, like, I teach in a very conservative, all white school or mostly white school. You still want to have those stories shown to your kids in the room, because that's how they're going to get their experience of people of other cultures. If their daily life does not include different kinds of people, different kinds of skin, different skin colors, different ethnicities, different religions, different sexual orientation. Like if you don't get to see, if you don't have that in your life, books are the way that you develop empathy and compassion for other people. And, you know, so even if your classroom looks exactly the same, all one way, you still want to make sure you're showing them how the other, you know, worlds that are out there. You want to be providing windows for them to look into, you know, the lives of other people that they might not be seeing every single day and having that own personal experience. So be mindful of that. You know, make sure that you're being as representative as possible. And again, making sure that that representation is written by people who've had that experience. You know, we don't want stories about Black kids that are only written by white people, because there's going to be there's a disconnect there. You know, there's things that they just won't be able to capture. You don't want, you know, you want to make sure you're including authors of all different nationalities, ethnicities, colors, religions in your room, and presenting that to kids all the time. So again, engaging in vigilant self-awareness, making sure that you are constantly checking yourself and checking in with yourself, and making sure that, you know, you're doing everything that you can to, you know, create an anti-racist space. The third thing is you need to start being uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. Robin DiAngelo in White Fragility says, talking about race is hard because racism is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It is not limited to a single act or person. So many people think that racism is using the N-word or telling a racist joke. It's so much more than that, and it's so much harder to see. And every time you like turn a corner, you're going to find something somewhere else, and then, you know, you deal with that, and then you turn a corner and then it's somewhere else. I mean, it's everywhere, and you are constantly going to be uncomfortable on this journey. So the only thing you can do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is definitely hard. As I said to you in the first video, we feel a deep sense of shame because for a lot of white folks, we don't consider ourselves to be bad people. We're not racist. We're not using the N-word. We're not doing things that we know are inappropriate. We're not those kind of people. We're teachers. We love kids. We want to be doing the best for kids. We don't feel like we're doing anything wrong. And so when we talk about racism, when we talk about things that we could be doing, you know, it is really personal. And again, it causes discomfort, shame and embarrassment, fear, and a lot of times that leads to anger. So the only thing you can do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Know that this is not going to be the easiest journey in the world, but that's okay. That's all part of the work. Also know that, know that the people in your life are going to get annoyed. They're going to get angry. They're going to tire of you. You know, I've said before, I can clear a party. I can ruin Christmas dinner. I'm not saying that because I'm super proud of it. I'm saying it because it's just really true. People don't like this conversation, and they get tired of hearing about it, and they get annoyed, and they're just like, gosh, why does everything have to be about race? And it's because everything can be about race. It really can. Like I said, once you start uncovering this and you start understanding it, and every time you turn a corner, you see it somewhere else. And you want to talk about it so bad, but understand that people are not going to necessarily like to hear about it. And it's going to frustrate you, and it's going to, you know, it's going to be hard. But again, this is the work. It's more than just putting up, you know, a black screen for your profile picture to show solidarity, or just even sharing, you know, a meme. This is about making people engage and talking to people and making them uncomfortable too, and making them dig deeper. You know, so just get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And also know that you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes in this all the time. Like I said, I'm always learning. I am always, trying to unpack and discover. And I make mistakes. I definitely do. So you always want to be open to learning yourself. I mean, this is a lifelong journey. This is constantly ongoing. You're not just going to wake up tomorrow and be, a perfect anti-racist ally. You're not. There's a lot of bumps. And you have to be comfortable with that, and you have to accept that and be willing to stop talking sometimes and be willing to listen and be willing to apologize and be willing to dig deeper. It's just something you're going to have to do. The fourth thing that you can do to be an anti-racist teacher is talk about race with your students. Deanna Simmons, in that same article I mentioned before, How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator, says, white educators, which I had shared with you before, is 79% of the teaching population, do not feel comfortable talking about race. But when we shy away from open conversations about race with young people, we sow the seeds of prejudice by inadvertently sending messages that something is wrong with people from another race. You want to learn how to talk about this stuff with your kids. And these are sensitive conversations, so I cannot stress enough that you want to be learning and learning and learning. Read books, follow the social media of people who are doing this work and doing it well. I talked to you about Not Light But Fire for white folks who teach in the hood. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? The Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys. I mean, these are books that you are going to need because they're going to help you be able to facilitate conversations about race with your kids. I know that so many of you are scared to do this. I have teachers say this to me all the time. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing and I don't want to offend anyone, so I just shy away from it. But you really don't want to do that. You want to learn how to have these conversations and learn how to make them be productive in your room. It's one of the best things you can do. My biggest sort of piece of advice that I give to teachers a lot is that Black people already know all about racism. So you don't have to dance around it or think it's impolite to mention it. I think I've seen this happen too in workshops that I've done. Like if there's one person, if there's a Black person in the room and we're talking about racism, everybody sort of looks at them the whole time. Like, oh my gosh, are we making you uncomfortable? Is this upsetting you? Did I offend you in some way? We are always sort of checking. And so we almost just want to say nothing because we're so afraid of saying something that's painful, or, thinking that it's impolite to be talking about racism. But again, Black people know all about this because they experience it every day. You're the one that's uncomfortable. They already know all about this. There's nothing that you can, say that's going to show them something that they didn't already know. They're there. The other piece of advice I think is important to give too, especially if you teach, if most of your kids are, let's say, white and you have a couple of Black students in the room, which, I've had teachers talk to me about that before where that one, they don't want to talk about it ever because they think it's impolite. But then the other thing is you want to make sure that you don't ever put your students of color and this is true for anything that you talk about. Like if you're going to talk about gender or sexuality or religion, it's not the job of the one kid in the room to speak for everyone. So if you have a classroom and you've got 25 kids in it and, 22 of them are white, it's not the job of the 3 Black kids in the room to speak for all Black people. So you want to make sure that you're not necessarily doing that either. It's not their job to teach everybody about racism. It's not their job to speak for everyone of color. That's not what they're there to do. Hold on, one other thing that I wanted to say is, the other thing too, because I've seen this happen before. So if you're having a conversation with your students and a person of color if a Black person says, oh, but what happened just there, that was racist. And you say something like, I don't think that's how they intended it to be. Can you explain more? It's really difficult for kids to take something humongous like racism and explain it to you in a few short sentences. You don't want kids to have to defend the idea that racism even exists. That's not their job. And that's a really difficult position to put a kid in when you're in the classroom. So you don't necessarily want to be doing that either. So yeah, you don't ever want to put a child in the position where they have to defend something like race, like something humongous like racism, making them have to defend it. That's a difficult position to put them in, and that makes kids uncomfortable. And what they tend to do is just stop talking because they have no idea what to say or how to even explain this. And so they just stop talking, which isn't necessarily what you want either. You don't want them to feel like shut down or shut out. All right, and then my last piece of advice, because this video is getting crazy long. And this is the hardest one, but you need to be active when you see racism. You need to actively call it out. In the article, How Can We Build Anti-Racist White Teachers by Charlie McGeehan, again, you can Google that one. It says, white people have a responsibility to work with other white people to build anti-racist identities and practices. We have to practice being anti-racist, and that means calling out racism when we see it. This is difficult for teachers because sometimes it means going up against administration, and we don't like to do that. We are timid and we are shy, and we don't want to cause trouble. And I am sure that, yes, like there are situations where you work in a building where people are not at all open to this line of conversation, and you might feel really scared calling out something that you saw or that you think is unfair. But there really isn't any choice. I mean, racism, any ism, any kind of phobia, any kind of, anything, racism, homophobia, misogyny, those sorts of things. We need to actively fight against them. They're not just going to disappear on their own. We have to do the work to push against them, and we can use our privilege to do that. And that's really one of the most important parts of our job. We need to encourage our schools to be constantly questioning their practices, the resources that we use, the policies that we have. Start with dress code. It's always a place where you can sort of uncover some racist thinking. Also gender inequity. Their admissions, like if you're in a college or in a private school. But yeah, if you're somewhere that, you have an admissions process, be thinking critically about that, be looking at it. Hiring practices. Again, as teachers, we're not necessarily responsible for hiring people. That's the job of administrators, but you can certainly, voice concern if you see things, and just, if you're on a hiring committee or, whatever, like you can say, hey, listen, it's important that we have some representation here. Can we think outside the box? Can we give this, candidate another shot? So again, yes, that's mostly administration, but there are things you can do, things that you can say. Look at your grading policies, look at your behavior management practices, all those things. If you dig into them, most schools can find some racism there. I mean, just look at just do a Google search of number of Black kids who get suspended every year. Find some of those charts that break down number of suspensions by race, by gender. You will see some glaring issues with how disproportionately schools punish kids. Look at it, talk about it, have a PLC on it. It takes courage to fight the status quo. It definitely does. You have to be willing, again, to make yourself be uncomfortable, you're gonna piss people off. You just need to accept that that's part of this, and you need to have the courage to fight through it. And, that's how you dismantle status quo. That's how you dismantle a system that's not fair for everyone. All right, that was a lot. That was definitely, this is long. So if you have stuck with me all the way through this, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. So again, let me just repeat real quick the 5 things you can do. You want to acknowledge racism. You want to acknowledge white supremacy, even if it makes you uncomfortable. You want to engage in vigilant self-awareness. Be constantly checking yourself. Be digging deeper, thinking, reflecting. Just get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because this will be uncomfortable. Talk about race. Talk about it in your classroom. Talk about it with your colleagues. You want to be having these conversations. Create spaces where you can practice these conversations safely, and, and those will be spaces where you grow. And then lastly, be active when you see racism. One last piece of advice about that. One of the things that I think is really important to do when you're sort of calling out something that you think or that you see as racist, always make sure that you call out the act, the policy, the action, the rule, whatever it is, and not the person. When you call someone a racist, boom, they shut down right away. They can't get out of that. And they are immediately thinking, well, that's not true. You know nothing about me. And now they've shut you down completely. But when you call out their action or you call out a policy, that's different than calling someone a racist. It makes it easier to discuss. So, you don't want to be barging into your, vice principal's office and accusing them of being a racist. I mean, that could be true in some situations, but instead, if you really want to have a productive conversation, call out whatever it was that you saw happen, or again, like whatever policy you might have, as being racist, not the person itself. When you take that sort of personal attack away, it makes people be less reluctant to talk about it. So that's my last piece of advice for that. All right. So this is the 3rd and final video for right now. I appreciate it if you took your time to sort of watch this series. Thank you for all the people who reached out, for people who just, shared questions or concerns. I received a lot more direct messaging than just comments underneath with this one, I think, because people are just so reluctant to put themselves out there and ask a question or make a statement in public, and that's perfectly fine. I've gotten back to everybody, I think, who've, talked to me about this. Again, I'm not an expert in this at all, but I just was hoping that by me sharing some of this with you, since, some of you have been with me since the very beginning when I first started Musings from the Middle School, I was just hoping that this would, make you feel a little bit safer to start exploring some of these big ideas if you've never talked about it before. And I wanted to make sure that I explained that I went through this too, that I certainly, I've been on a long journey here. This is not something that I am an expert at all, or something that I know super well. This is just, I just wanted to share my journey, hoping that would, make you a little bit more comfortable with yours. So, all right, that's all I got for today. Again, thanks for going with me on this. And I'll see you again soon. All right. Bye-bye.